Alright, so today I'm making New York style pizza. I was planning on starting with a bunch of math and showing some baker's formulas, and I have decided against that. So now right here I've got two dough balls, and I will give all of that pertinent information later in the video on how to do all of this. These have had a refrigerator rise for 24 hours, and they have been sitting on my counter now, rising at room temperature for 2 hours. Now, the reason you would want to do this is if you're trying to run a pizza restaurant or something like this, you want dough that is capable of sitting in the fridge for a while and then having a little bit of error rate, so that if on Tuesday you were expecting to sell 25 pizzas and you only sold, say, 10 pizzas, the dough from that day does not go to completely to waste. And so formulas have been made through time and experimentation so that you can do a cold rise with a little bit of an error rate. And so that's what I've made here, and I'll give that formula later. These things have to sit after I've mashed them out like that for about 10 minutes to rest, because the gluten needs to rest in its new thing here before I try to toss these. I've made two 16-ounce pies here, and we should have some pretty good pizza. Now, how is New York style different from the last video? The last video is here. The last video was about a style I call American style, and that's like Papa John's, etc., etc. Those typically have a little bit thicker crusts. With New York style, you're typically dealing with a thinner crust, usually 16 to 18 inch pizza, and the idea is that you want to have a dough recipe and some techniques in place to be able to make a dough that is stable in the fridge or whatever cooler you happen to have at your establishment, that can be risen on the counter within about 2 hours, and then baked in a deck oven. Okay, a deck oven is completely different from your home oven. It's totally different. Come over here and I'll kind of explain a little bit about what a deck oven is. So a deck oven is an oven that's about this tall, that has a surface on the bottom it depends on the deck oven, but most of them have some sort of a stone type bottom, and then a few, that many inches above is the top of the oven. And typically you put the pizza in straight on that bottom deck, and you really can't do that at home. The other thing you can't do at home is that a typical New York pizza oven, and again, I'm just going from my research. You may have other research, and you may be right and I may be wrong. Put it in the comments. Anyway, a typical New York pizza style oven circa 2013 has an operating range of about 650 degrees. Every time they open the oven door, it goes down a little bit, but them opening their oven door is very, very different from me opening my oven door, in that they're able to maintain a much higher temperature. In order to turn your home oven into a deck oven, the way that I've figured out how to do this is to use 2 pizza stones and an hour-long preheat at the highest temperature that your oven will go to. Mine goes to 550. That's still not as hot as a commercial pizza oven, but I think that it probably approximates the average temperature that a pizza in New York hits the stone at. Because again, they're opening and closing the door all day long, and they will lose heat throughout the day and pick it up when they're not busy, etc., etc. The problem with these, if you look, my oven is actually this tall, and the temperature at the very bottom, I've measured this, can be very different from the temperature at the top. So in order to get consistent heat in this type of an oven, I've developed a 2 baking stone style system when I'm trying to approximate a deck oven. This doesn't work for everything. This specifically works for New York style pizza. And so here's what you've got. I've got a baking stone on the bottom and a baking stone a few racks above. The distance there is probably about 6 inches. And the idea there being that the top baking stone will collect as much heat as the bottom baking stone. The bottom may be a little bit hotter, but the top should still have some significant heat to radiate down from the top on our pizza. And this is a problem baking pizza in home ovens. Your bottom will get too crispy and your top will stay, you know, uncooked. So in order to get the top cooked, you either have to switch from the bottom shelf to the top shelf, or you have to do a bunch of monkey business nonsense. This is the way that I have figured out that you can make a pizza in a deck oven fashion, which is a New York style modern day pizza fashion, and do it at home. Now, one other thing to say is that there is an elite style New York pizza, and those are pizzas that are more in the Neapolitan style. I will get into that in a future episode. Gotta turn this down, obviously. I will get into elite style New York pizza in a future episode. But basically, that was the first wave of pizza brought over to the United States. Most of it is still very, very applicable to Neapolitan style pizza, except that they were using coal fire ovens. Why coal instead of wood? New York City is a hell of a long ways away from woods. Okay, their natural materials, once people started making pizza, were coal, not wood, coal. In the very first years of pizza making in New York, houses were heated by coal, businesses were heated by coal. Coal was readily available. Having actual wood, not so much. So they built coal-fired ovens. So the first New York style pizza was actually in coal style ovens at places like Grimaldi's and some other places. So let's see how our dough is done here. I'm just going to spread it out a little bit more. Again, the idea is you could try to stretch this out completely the first time to the exact right diameter. The problem is you're going to develop tears in the dough and things like this. And basically what you want to do is give the gluten a chance to react. Every once in a while it's okay if you want to take up and stretch. What I'm stretching here is the rim. I'm not stretching the middle. The middle is already stretched. If I stretch the middle, I'll get a hole. So I'm just rotating this dough around, trying to stretch the outside, and I'm going to put it back down. It's okay to do that every once in a while. I'm going to do that with this pizza, focusing on putting the stretch out here at the rim. The dough processing technique, ooh, that's about to rip. I'm going to set that down, let it rest a little bit, but the dough processing techniques for all of this is present in the first video. Again, you can watch that link to figure out how to get to the point we're at now. And so just in case you're wondering, this is a little mini greenhouse that I have. I've got 3 scorpion peppers in the front there. Back there, there's 72 peppers of various varieties. Then I've got some tomatoes down there. And the lights are mainly for heat at this point. Peppers require some pretty warm temperatures in order to germinate. When I start getting some germination, I'm going to switch everything to a timer and blah blah blah. But anyway, so now this skin here is basically ready to go. So I'm just going to lift it up. The idea is to support it as much as you can and then put it onto a pizza peel. This pizza peel has more of my bench flour in it, and you can see the center is very thin, and I'm not too crazy about that, but it's the way this particular one worked out. And on my pizza peel I have a 16-inch circle outlined, and so I know exactly how big a 16-inch pizza is. I'm going to take a little sauce here, going to be careful about that center, because the center is going to be a little bit more fragile because it's so thin. Remember that anywhere that you don't have sauce and cheese is going to rise up and form the edges of your crust. And so anywhere that you don't want to have big bubbles, etc., etc., spread pretty generously with sauce and cheese. For my pizzas, I really like Stella whole milk mozzarella, which is available at Sam's Club. Believe me, they aren't paying me anything, or I wouldn't live in the house that I live in. But that whole milk mozzarella seems to make great pizzas at home. And so now that I have my sauce, this is just a plain old cheese pizza. You can try to doctor your pizzas up with a bunch of different ingredients, etc., and try to hide what it is. But if you want the true flavor of the pizza, just go ahead and make a cheese pizza for your first one. And this should pretty adequately show the deficiencies of my pizza making technique, mainly that there's a very soft spot at the center of this. I'm hoping that I do not get a hole in the dough. And it will also show the strengths of this type of dough in that it's got a really good flavor when it's cooked. It's got a very different kind of texture because of the oven and drying. Go away, Nellie. Go away. She thinks she's getting some pizza or something. It's got a very different texture because the stone does dry out the crust somewhat. Now, with these thinner crust pizzas, the thing you want to know is that you don't want to overdo it with the toppings. And I'm going to put this in the oven, and first I'm going to get rid of that dog, and then I'll put it in the oven. Now this is the hard part, getting the pizza onto the stone in the oven. And I don't have a lot of great advice for you, except that you don't want to bunch things up. So start at the back of the stone, give it a little shake, and see if you can lift it off and get it onto that stone the best you can. Like so. It started to slip off, and a generous kind of helping of my, for lack of a better term, bench blasting powder is what helps us get this off of there. And a good shake, another shake, boom, like that, and it's off. Okay, so we've cooked our pizza here. Ooh, steam. And I'm going to take it out here. And that would be a New York style pizza. No nonsense, no monkey business. What you see is what you get. It's probably better than what you're going to get at your average Ray's, etc. But they all have kind of the same idea in common. And I'm going to put this onto the board for slicing. And I'm about to make another pizza. One of the key things when you're using an oven like this is to let the oven warm back up before you put the next pizza in, because we've just lost probably 20 or 30 degrees. So if we give the oven 10 minutes to recover, we should be good. The other thing is to let this sit a minute before you slice it. If you slice it right now, you're going to get problems with moisture and all sorts of things that if you just would wait a couple minutes, you'll be able to slice your pizza and have it end up really, really tasty. Okay, so now I have our finished pizza. This one turned out really, really good. And I just have a roller cutter. I ordered one of these things. I've never used one of those. I've always just used a roller. Let's see what we get here. And we'll try here. And right here. Okay, so let's take a look at a slice. That's what the bottom looks like. Come in there and look at that. That's goddamn perfect. And this is foldable. You know, you can eat this like a typical New York slice. You fold it. I wish that my oven was big enough to bake 18-inch sized pieces, because typically the pieces that I've seen in New York are just huge. And I think it's because they're baking 18-inch size slices, but this is 16-inch standard size pizza, and this turned out pretty darn good just based on the recipe that I'm going to present in just a little bit. So let's see how this does. If you lift it up, it's a little bit thin towards the center. I was kind of expecting that because of the thing. It's crispy, but it folds in half real nice. That's good pizza. Today I'm going to talk very briefly about baker's percentages or baker's formulas, and then get on to a presentation of New York style pizza. I promise I'll make the math section of this very short, and since I'm doing it so quickly, I'll put all of the information you need in the description for this video. This is actually part 2 of a series that I'm doing on different styles of pizza and things like that. If you want to, you can look at part 1 here. In part 1 I made the case that baker's formulas are a really powerful tool that can help you in all of your baking and pizza making stuff, just because you can take a percentage-based formula and scale the recipe all the way down from nickel-sized pizzas up to stadium-sized pizzas. And another reason why baker's percentages or baker's formulas are real important is that in commercial enterprises you're typically baking with huge quantities. You know, a typical pizzeria might use a 50-pound bag of flour. And if you make a mistake with that, or if you're noticing problems because your pizzeria or your business is a little bit hotter in the summer, then you can trace the source of that mistake back to the baker's formula and adjust things like yeast and salt percentage for some of the problems that you might encounter with dough rise times and things like that. So just briefly, I'm going to go through the baker's formula for a typical New York style dough, and then just briefly show the calculations used to come up with a 16-inch pizza. So a typical New York style dough, this one is for a dough that is typically baked in a deck oven right directly on the deck. So the crust brown's a lot easier, and you don't need to use sugar in there, because typically the sugar in a dough will increase the crust browning. Why do I know that? Because of working with baker's formulas over the years. Most of the dough made in pizza places and other restaurants is made in big batches and then put in the fridge until it's ready to use. So they've formulated doughs that use less yeast and rise slower and have a longer shelf life. So a typical New York style dough has a flour at 100%, a water at 63%, salt at 1.75%, and oil at 1%, and a yeast, instant dry yeast, at 0.25%. Now for a 16-ounce pizza, a typical New York pizzeria is going to use a 20-ounce dough ball. And the formula for how to figure that out led to something called the thickness factor, so that you can reliably tell how much dough to use for what size pizza based on the particular style. Briefly, the formula for that is weight, the weight of your dough needs to be pi times the radius times the thickness factor. And a thickness factor for a New York style pizza would be 0.1. Now, if you're trying to figure out how to go from a baker's formula to an actual weight-based recipe, the first thing to do is to add up all the percentages in the formula. So in this case we have 100 from the flour, 63 from the water, 1.75 from the salt, 1% from the oil, and 0.25% from the yeast, for a total of 166%. Ignore the fact that you can't have that. Now you have to find out the weight of the flour. And the flour weight is equal to the dough weight that you figured out you need, in our case 20 ounces, divided by the total percentage of your formula. And the total percent here is expressed as a ratio of 1. So 166% turns into 1.66. So there's 567 grams roughly in 20 ounces of dough. And whenever I do this, I round up. If I get like 7.4 grams, I round down. 7.5 grams, I round up. So it's 567 grams is going to be your dough weight for a 16-ounce pizza. The flour weight is equal to the dough weight divided by total percent. So 567 grams divided by your total percent, which is 1.66, equals 341.6 grams, or 342 grams. That's how much flour you need. Now for each of the ingredients, it's pretty easy. You just take your flour weight times the ingredient percent. So for water, it's 0.63 times 567, or 357 grams. Salt, it's 0.0175 times 567, or 10 grams. Oil is 0.01 times 567, equals 6 grams. Instant dry yeast equals 0.0025 times 567, or 1.4 grams, rounded up to 2. That was a lot of math. Sorry about that.